Open your phone's camera app right now. Point it at anything. Now close it. Here's what most people never think about in that moment. You just activated one of the most powerful surveillance sensors ever built into a consumer device, and the camera didn't necessarily stop working when you closed the app. There is a single setting on your phone, active by default on billions of devices worldwide, that silently embeds your exact home address, your daily route, your workplace, and your children's school into every single photo you take. You've been handing that information to strangers every time you share a picture. And that's only where this story begins. Let's establish something important before anything else, because this conversation deserves honesty rather than panic. There are two separate, distinct camera threats on your phone, and confusing them leads either to dismissing a real problem or to fearing an imaginary one. The first threat is the one affecting every single person watching this video, regardless of who they are or what they do. A specific default camera setting that has been embedding precise GPS coordinates into every photo you've taken for years, silently, invisibly, without a single warning. And those coordinates are leaving your device in ways most people never anticipated when they hit share. The second threat is more extreme, actual spyware capable of accessing your camera without any visible indicator, used by sophisticated attackers against high-value targets. Both threats are real, both are documented, and both have specific, actionable solutions. But it's the first one that's quietly affecting your life right now, and it's the first one we need to understand completely before anything else. Here's what's actually embedded in the photo you took last Tuesday, the one of your dinner you posted to a group chat or shared on social media. On the surface, it's just a picture. But inside that image file, wrapped in a hidden data layer the naked eye can never see, sits a complete record of your life at the moment the shutter closed. The exact latitude and longitude coordinates of where you were standing, accurate to within a few meters. The exact date and time, down to the second. The make, model, and specific camera unit of your phone. The aperture, ISO setting, and shutter speed used. In some cases, the altitude above sea level, and the exact compass direction the camera was pointing. All of that information, called EXIF data, travels silently inside the image file every single time you share that photo. It doesn't disappear when you crop the image. It doesn't disappear when you add a filter. It survives intact through most messaging apps, through email, through every method of sharing where the file itself changes hands. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you. Anyone who receives that photo, anyone who downloads it, anyone who has access to the right viewing tool, which costs nothing and takes 30 seconds to find online, can extract every single piece of that information from the file immediately. Think about the practical reality of what this means in daily life. Not in a hypothetical scenario, but in the specific, ordinary moments most people experience every week. You sell something on Facebook Marketplace, photographed in your living room at home. The buyer receives your listing photo containing the GPS coordinates of your front door. You post a photo of your child's birthday party. That image, shared to a group chat containing people you haven't seen in years, contains the exact address where your family lives. You apply for a job and submit a portfolio of your work photography, each image containing device details that can be cross-referenced against your other accounts to build a comprehensive profile of your movements. You share a photo with a journalist you're helping, and the metadata in that file can potentially identify exactly which building you were in when you took it, down to which floor. OSINT researchers, who study open source intelligence gathering professionally, have documented that in nearly 90% of their investigations, image metadata provided critical attribution evidence that was completely invisible within the photograph itself. Ransomware groups have been traced to their actual countries of origin through XIF data embedded in promotional screenshots. Domestic abuse survivors have been located through GPS coordinates embedded in photos they believed were private. This is not theoretical risk. These are documented outcomes from documented cases happening with ordinary photos taken by ordinary devices using a setting that is still turned on by default on your phone right now. The specific setting is your camera's location access. On iPhone, navigate to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Location Services, then scroll to the camera app itself. The setting most people find when they check is either while using the app or Ask Next Time. Either of these settings allows your camera to embed GPS coordinates into every single photo you take. Change it to never. The moment you make that change, every photo you take from that point forward stops carrying your location. Existing photos in your library still retain their metadata, but every new capture becomes location clean by default. On Android, the process varies slightly by manufacturer. On Samsung devices, open the camera app, tap the settings gear, and look for location tags, then toggle it off. On Pixel devices, open the camera app, go to Settings, and find Save Location, then disable it. The specific label differs between manufacturers and operating system versions, but the function is identical, and the location is always within the camera app's own settings menu. This takes approximately 30 seconds. It requires no technical knowledge. And once it's done, you've permanently closed what cybersecurity researchers at UC Berkeley specifically identified as one of the most overlooked data exposure vectors in modern personal technology, a vulnerability that lets anyone who receives your photos potentially determine where you sleep every night. Now, let's address the platform question, because almost everyone makes an incorrect assumption here that matters enormously. The common belief is that when you upload a photo to Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, the platform strips the metadata, so you're protected even if you didn't disable location beforehand. And in one specific, narrow sense, that belief is partially accurate. For the public-facing, downloadable version of your photo, those platforms do remove GPS coordinates from what other users can download. But here's what the platforms quietly do not advertise. The moment you upload that photo, the platform ingests your complete, original metadata file, GPS coordinates and all, before doing anything to the publicly accessible copy. Your location data doesn't disappear. It transfers to them exclusively. Instead of being readable by anyone who downloads your photo, it's now held by a corporation using it for analytics, geotagging, and advertising targeting. The privacy protection isn't that your location data stops being collected. It's that only the platform collects it, rather than any random stranger who downloads your image. Testing conducted in early 2026 across multiple major platforms found that not a single one provides complete metadata protection across all sharing contexts. Facebook Marketplace specifically showed inconsistent GPS stripping in test conditions, which matters because Marketplace involves sharing photos with strangers who are specifically planning to come to your physical location. Meanwhile, iMessage and email, the two most common ways people share photos person to person, both transmit the complete original file with all metadata intact by default, including full GPS coordinates every single time. WhatsApp has a specific behavior that caught many privacy-aware users by surprise during recent testing. In standard photo mode, the app strips most EXIF data, including GPS, before sending, which is the safer default. But WhatsApp also offers the option to send a photo as a document rather than a standard photo. When you use that document mode, the file transfers completely intact, GPS coordinates and all, to whoever you're sending it to. Most people switch to document mode to avoid WhatsApp's image compression, to preserve full quality when sending professional photos. In doing so, they're unknowingly sending their home address alongside those high-resolution images. Telegram in file mode carries the same behavior. GPS data survives intact to the recipient. Signal, by contrast, strips all metadata before sending and stores nothing. On its own servers, making it the only major messaging platform that provides complete protection by default across all sharing modes. And none of this has anything to do with your camera's location setting being on or off, because that setting determines whether the coordinates get embedded in the first place. Fix the source, and none of the downstream behavior matters. Now here's where the second threat enters the story. And this is the part that sounds like fiction, but is fully documented by security researchers as of February 2026. A spyware program called Predator, developed by a European surveillance company called Intellexa, received a significant update that gave it the ability to completely hide Apple's privacy indicator dots, the green and orange signals that appear at the top of your iPhone screen whenever any app is accessing the camera or microphone. These dots were introduced specifically with iOS 14 to give users a clear, visible signal of sensor activity. Apple tied them to hardware-level behavior, making them extremely difficult to suppress. And yet, researchers at Jamf, who documented this specific capability, confirmed that Predator now uses a single hook function within Springboard, the core system application, that intercepts sensor activity changes at the moment they happen, preventing any indicator from ever appearing on screen. The result is that someone running Predator on a target device can access both the camera and the microphone simultaneously, with no visible signal of any kind appearing to the device's owner. The green dot doesn't appear. The orange dot doesn't appear. Nothing appears. The camera is running and you have no way of knowing. Here's the critical context that security researchers themselves emphasize, because misunderstanding it leads to excessive anxiety about a risk that doesn't actually apply to most people's situations. Predator-grade spyware requires a device to already be fully compromised at the kernel level before this particular feature can function. You can't install it by clicking a suspicious link in a normal browser. It requires either a zero-click exploit, an extremely rare and expensive attack vector typically used by nation-states and well-funded criminal organizations against specific high-value individuals, or physical access to your device for long enough to perform a deep installation. This type of tool is primarily documented as being used against journalists, political activists, dissidents, attorneys handling sensitive cases, business executives, and government officials. It is not the threat vector targeting the average person reading text messages about package deliveries, but it matters for the broader story about camera privacy for two specific reasons. First, it proves definitively that these camera indicator systems can be bypassed by sophisticated actors, which means the absence of the green dot is not an absolute guarantee of camera inactivity. Second, it establishes that the category of someone remotely accessing your phone camera is not a paranoid fantasy, but a real, documented, actively developed threat capability. For ordinary users, the actual camera-related threats are different in nature and considerably more common. Any app that has received camera permission from you during installation can access that camera during the time the app is running in the foreground. Most people grant camera permission during initial setup without examining why a specific app is requesting it, because the permission prompt arrives at a moment when you're trying to complete a setup process quickly, rather than evaluating the necessity of each request. Apps with camera permission that also have background data access can transmit images or frame captures to external servers in ways users may never directly see or detect. Security researchers have documented multiple cases where social media and third-party apps were found, accessing the camera during periods when users weren't actively using any camera function. This isn't necessarily malicious in every case. Some apps use brief camera access for ambient light sensing, for QR code scanning readiness, or for augmented reality feature preparation. But the combination of unnecessary camera permission plus network access permissions creates a data channel that doesn't need to be opened for most of the apps people routinely install. The tool Apple provides to audit this specific behavior is called the App Privacy Report, and the most important thing to understand about it is that it's turned off by default and almost certainly never been enabled on your device. Navigate to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then App Privacy Report, and tap Turn on App Privacy Report. Once enabled, it starts building a rolling 7-day record of every time any app on your phone accessed the camera, the microphone, your contacts, your location, and your photos, with exact timestamps for each access event. It also shows which external domains each app has communicated with, revealing whether data is being sent to third-party advertising networks or analytics companies. Security researcher Arun Vishwanath described it precisely. It functions like a dashboard, showing exactly what each app is doing, when it's doing it, and what it's connecting to externally. This report is stored only on your device, and Apple doesn't collect it. The moment you enable it, you'll have more clear, specific information about your phone's camera activity than you've ever had before. If you enable it and later check the report, the diagnostic question to ask about each app is simple. Does the frequency and timing of camera access match how often you actually use that specific app for camera-related functions? If an app shows camera access at 2 a.m. when you were asleep, or at a time when you were using a completely different application, that's a flag worth investigating immediately. On Android, the equivalent tool is the Privacy Dashboard, accessible through Settings, then Security and Privacy, then Privacy Dashboard, which provides the same category of timestamp indexed access history across all major permissions. Let's talk about the photo library permission problem, because it connects directly to the camera threat in a way most users don't immediately recognize. Many apps request access to your entire photo library when they only need to display or upload a single image. Full photo library access doesn't just give that app the ability to see your pictures. It gives the app access to every piece of XIF. Metadata embedded in every photo in your library, which can include a complete GPS timeline of everywhere you've been over the entire period you've owned your phone. If your camera's location setting has been active for years, your photo library contains a precise, time-stamped record of your home address, your workplace, your frequent locations, your travel patterns, and your family members' locations, going back to every photograph you've ever taken. An app with full library access during that brief window when it's running in the foreground can technically read all of that metadata in ways you'd have no visibility into from the outside. The fix is straightforward and doesn't meaningfully disrupt how apps function. On iPhone, go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Photos, and review each app listed there. For any app that doesn't have a genuinely clear reason to see your entire photo history, change its access from all photos to selected photos. In selected photos mode, the app can only see the specific images you personally choose to share with it, one at a time, on demand. It cannot browse, scan, or read the metadata of the rest of your library. Now let's walk through the complete specific checklist of changes that close these documented vulnerabilities, because the goal of this entire conversation is not simply to create anxiety about something you can't control. Every single issue discussed here has a concrete, specific, implementable solution that requires no technical expertise and takes under 10 minutes to complete. The first and most critical change is the camera location setting, already described in detail. settings, then privacy and security, then location services, then camera, then never on iPhone, camera app settings, then location tags off on Android. This is the single highest impact privacy change most people have never made. The second change is enabling the app privacy report on iPhone, which transforms your relationship with camera and microphone access from blind trust to informed visibility. Settings, then privacy and security, then app privacy report, then turn on. Let it run for at least a week before reviewing, because the value comes from the pattern it reveals over time, not from a single day snapshot. The third change is auditing camera permissions themselves. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Camera on iPhone, and review the complete list of apps with camera access. Go through each one individually and ask honestly whether that specific app's core function requires camera access. A banking app almost certainly doesn't need it. A utility app absolutely doesn't need it. A game with no camera feature doesn't need it. Toggle off access for every app that fails that simple test. The fourth change is limiting photo library access from all photos to selected photos for every app that doesn't have a clear operational reason to browse your full history. The fifth change, connecting to the EXIF problem at its transmission layer, is to actively remove GPS metadata before sharing photos through channels that don't automatically strip it. On iPhone, when you tap Share on any photo, you'll see an Options button at the top of the share sheet. Tapping it reveals a location toggle. Turning that off removes the GPS coordinates from that specific share, without altering the original stored photo or affecting any other metadata. This takes one extra tap and closes the transmission gap completely for that share event. For a more permanent solution, on iPhone, the camera location setting change eliminates the problem at capture rather than requiring action at every share. There are also several adjacent settings worth addressing because they extend the same data exposure pattern into related categories. Voice assistants, both Siri and Google Assistant, operate in a continuous low-power listening state monitoring for trigger phrases. While they're not recording full conversations for external transmission, the microphone is active during this state, and users who are concerned about camera and microphone access generally want this behavior made explicit and consensual rather than simply default. On iPhone, this is managed through Settings, then Siri, where you can disable Listen for Hey Siri, or the equivalent trigger phrase setting. On Android, it's in the Google app settings under Hey Google and Voice Match. Disabling the always-on listening doesn't eliminate the assistant. It simply requires you to activate it manually through a button press rather than a voice trigger. Bluetooth and local network scanning are two permissions that rarely appear in camera privacy conversations, but connect to the same underlying concern about device sensors gathering information about your physical environment without clear disclosure. Many apps request local network permission in order to scan for nearby devices, which can reveal details about your home infrastructure, the other devices on your network, and indirectly your physical location without relying on GPS at all. Review which apps have local network access under Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Local Network on iPhone, and revoke access for any app without a clear networking function. For anyone who wants to add a physical layer of protection to complement the software settings, there's a low-tech option that security professionals routinely use that requires no expertise at all: a small piece of opaque tape over the rear camera lens when the phone is in a pocket or bag. This sounds extreme in the context of everyday life, but it's worth knowing that even the former FBI Director James Comey mentioned this practice in a public interview years ago, and the underlying logic hasn't changed. No software setting, no matter how carefully configured, protects against a fully compromised device running kernel-level spyware of the kind Predator represents. Physical blocking of the lens provides protection that no piece of software can circumvent. For the vast majority of ordinary users, the software settings described in this video provide more than adequate protection. But for individuals in situations involving elevated personal risk, journalists, activists, attorneys in sensitive litigation, corporate executives handling confidential information, adding physical camera coverage during periods of non-use provides a genuine additional layer of protection that costs nothing. Here's the detail that brings all of these separate threads together into a single coherent picture of what's actually happening when you use your phone's camera in 2026. Most people think about camera privacy as a binary. Either the camera is on and you can see it's recording, or it's off and nothing is happening. The actual situation is considerably more layered than that binary allows for. Your camera is a sensor embedded in a device running dozens of applications, each with its own permission set, each communicating with external servers according to its own code in ways users cannot directly observe. The EXIF data embedded in your photos is a passive, invisible data channel that your camera creates without asking, that travels through most sharing mechanisms completely intact. And that reveals more about your physical location and daily patterns than most people would voluntarily hand to a stranger. The app privacy report sits on your device right now, off by default, capable of showing you a complete record of sensor access that most people have never seen because nobody told them to turn it on. And a piece of spyware updated as recently as February 2026 can suppress the very indicator dots specifically designed to alert you when something is using your camera on fully updated devices in ways that leave no visible trace. None of this means your phone camera is your enemy, or that every app on your device is trying to watch you, or that the situation is hopeless. The camera on your phone is also one of the most genuinely valuable tools you own. It captures memories, enables communication, supports work. And the goal is not to disable it or fear it, but to run it with clear, informed intention, rather than under a set of default settings designed for convenience rather than privacy. The changes described in this video don't diminish your camera's function at all. They simply close specific, documented data channels that have been open without your explicit decision to open them, and they give you the visibility tools to see what's actually happening on your own device. That gap between what users assume is happening and what the data shows is actually happening is precisely what makes camera privacy one of the most under-addressed issues in personal technology in 2026. Searches for photo metadata privacy grew by 23% year over year as more people begin to understand what their cameras are silently embedding and transmitting. The awareness is finally catching up to the reality. The question is whether your specific settings catch up before something you didn't intend to share has already left your device and arrived somewhere you can't retrieve it from.